Hi everyone, Michaela here from the CMTO. Welcome to the Technorama Tuesdays webinar series. We are joined by John, Stephen, Alastair, and Cameron for Stump the Chumps. I don't know if anyone out there has attended a Stump the Chumps before, but these webinars are particularly exciting because you get to ask some questions of the panel and pick their brains about some tech stuff. So really awesome. Ask lots of questions. We'll be monitoring the chat box and the Q&A box as well. And I will let John take it away.
Thanks, Mick. And hello, everybody. I come to you tonight from Jagera country, which is the area where Toowoomba is. The temperature outside is cold, and the temperature in here, thanks to a heater behind me, I hope it's not too noisy, is really rather comfy and pleasant. I'm joined today by three of my favourite colleagues, people who, when I pick up the phone and say, ooh, got a problem, are always happy to jump in and help. So I'd like to say evening to Alastair Reynolds.
Good evening, John and everybody.
Hello, Cameron Paine.
Hello, everyone.
And hello to Stephen Wilkinson.
Thank you, John. Hello.
Hello. All right, Cameron, you're allowed to turn your camera on when you feel like it. There we go. And I'll just take down the graphic. Now, we had a very exciting time tonight because we had hardware problems, platform problems, all kinds of problems, all of which shouldn't happen, despite running through 3 different tests. And this is live radio, television, webinar thing. This is exactly the stuff that we all deal with every day in radio. So anything could happen. Here's how this is going to work. If you haven't asked a question already, and you might have asked a question already, but if you haven't asked a question already, feel free to ask a question. You can use the Zoom Q&A box to do that. I'm surrounded by 5 screens and I can't look at everything at once. So if we miss the question, Mick is eventually going to say, oh, John, by the way, we have a question here. We'll take the question, and if you're up for it, we'll put you to air live. You can ask the question. It's just like talkback radio. There is no 7-second delay. There's no delay of any sort, in fact. I'd like to say good evening to all our participants who've joined us. And in fact, tonight I can announce, because I just noticed by going down to the bottom of the list, that a mate of mine who shows up as a Z exclamation mark, Z-Bang, who is a very good friend and who is actually joining us from San Francisco region, Alameda to be specific. But that's about I think the furthest participant that we had in general. There are community radio people all over the world, but Australia turns out to be probably the most developed community broadcasting system anywhere in the world. Certainly it's an amazing system. So here we are. We are all the people who, and I mean collectively, you included, are all the people who support in a technology way, the people who support community radio. And tonight is an opportunity to discuss really whatever we feel like. So let's see. We don't have any questions sitting in the Q&A at the moment. So I thought I might just sort of throw something open for discussion. This is what we're going to do. If you don't give us a question, we're just going to chat about stuff that interests us. We had some interesting discussions earlier. I'm going to start with transmitter replacement. Because transmitters used to be really well understood. Everybody who joined the industry would probably spend some, as a technologist, would spend some time out at the transmitter. And in the old days, and that would be when my dad was a boy and he started at 4BC in Brisbane at the transmitter, that was when people actually lived out at the transmitter. And the transmitters were often literally antenna farms. You'd have sheep and goats and cows wandering around keeping the grass down, and whoever was there got up every morning and shined the front of the transmitter, took all the readings, oh yes, the plate, oh the grid, and wrote it all down, and then did whatever they did during the day. And every so often there would be maintenance. Of course, these days, hardly any maintenance. Transmitters might run for 10 years or more without anybody even remembering to go and check anything. So we've all forgotten how to maintain transmitters. So first thing is, there was a there was an interesting picture in Q&A a couple of days ago from Radio Adelaide. There's a transmitter that is going there, and I think that was like 3 racks full of stuff. Alastair, what is and full disclosure, Alastair sells transmitters, and he'd better not try and do that tonight. But he certainly has worked with them a lot. How small are transmitters getting these days? How small could a transmitter be for the sort of powers a community radio station is talking about? And what would you look for?
Your typical size these days is 2 RU for say a 300, 500 watt transmitter, which would be a typical smaller community station. So if you're a station with a 300 watt EIRP or something like that, running into a simple antenna, a 300 watt transmitter in 2 RU it'll be compact, power efficient, probably around the 60% efficiency mark. And as you go up in power, you can increase in the efficiencies as well, largely because some people ask, why is a 150 watt transmitter only got an efficiency of about 50%? It's sort of like because it's running a lot of power just to run the exciter, the front panel, all the other brains and everything, and you're only using a little bit of it towards the output stage. You'll then have your larger transmitters, say you could go up to 1 kilowatt, 2 kilowatts in 3 RU quite easily. There are some over 1 kilowatt in 2 RU. Bit of a variable there, but your larger transmitter manufacturers, our favourites in Nortel, Gates, Broadcast Electronics or Roden Schwartz, 4 RU, you'll get up to 5 kilowatts in that.
So let's just put that in. That's about 4 RU there. So hang on, show the bottom of that. So yeah, so roughly the size of a head. I was going to say my head, but
I think yours is about 5 RUs. So
what is?
Your head is about 5 RUs.
About 5 RU. Oh, good.
The CD players on the shelf behind Alastair are a 2 RU each.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So there's a fair size comparison. That's like pretty amazing. But when we talk about efficiency, so we say something is 50% efficient. What that means is you're going to put in some heat, put in some power, and some of it is going to go up the stick, and some of it's going to come out as heat. So a 300 watt transmitter that was 50% efficient, you would get 300 watts out, but you'd be feeding 600 watts in, and 300 watts is going to heat up your transmitter room and all the equipment in the rack.
Yeah, but that's not a lot of power. The thing that a lot of people forget when we talk about the amount of heat that's generated even by a large transmitter, one person standing in a room is going to generate about a kilowatt, the equivalent of a 1 kilowatt bar heater just themselves standing there. 3 people standing around looking at a transmitter will generate about 3 kilowatts worth of heat into the room.
Am I allowed to disagree with you?
Well, you can go straight ahead. That's the general rule of thumb, which I've been working on for.
You might have very hot people. The number that I was given, and Tim Borges and I discussed this once at on a webinar, and I'm sure at Technorama, was about 70 to 100 watts per person in a room. So certainly 10 people in a meeting room is going to generate about a kilowatt if that number is correct.
I'd heard it was a lot higher than that, the actual heat generated by people. Anyway, regardless of which, a modern transmitter will not generate that much heat. A typical one, a recent transmitter we installed, a 20 kilowatt transmitter, is generating outputting around 6 kilowatts of heat, which is not a lot for a 20 kilowatt output.
It's a lot of heat to get rid of in a room. I mean, if you didn't have exhaust fans and some sort of air conditioning, that'd get pretty hot pretty quickly, I would think.
Yeah, but in comparison to what we used to generate, for instance, with a 10 or a 20 kilowatt tube-based transmitter, where you had a large stack going outside, large forced air cooling, exhaust stacks, it's a hell of a lot less. And then when you move up into the whether it's a Roden Schwartz, a Gates, or I'm not sure whether Nortel do yet, but a water-cooled transmitter, you've got a lot far lower heat dissipation.
I've just had, by the way, Tony has popped in 100 watts into the chat. I mean, like, vote for your amount of heat, folks. Let's see how much heat we can generate with the discussion. we'll just see what our other panelists are using. I don't run a community radio station anymore. Cameron, what sort of power is Triple R running in Melbourne?
We have a Eddystone transmitter that's putting out 10 kilowatts and a standby NEC transmitter that's capable of 5 kilowatts.
Okay, so 10 kilowatt transmitter. So you're probably putting 20 kilowatts of electricity into that?
I'll say approximately. I only see the bills just because of the way that the service provision works these days.
Right. You pick up the bills and they go, whee!
Well, they don't vary very much, but and I'm sure if I asked the question, I could have that reduced back to kilowatt hours. But I would only ask the question if the bill varied substantially month to month.
Right. Stephen, what's Hope doing?
We're running a 7.5 kilowatt transmitter at, I think it's 6.8 kilowatts, and but we're going into a 16 bay antenna system. So we used to be into an 8 bay antenna system running 10 kilowatts, but now we're running 16 bay antenna system with 6.8 kilowatts.
Okay, help me with the maths. What's the gain of that antenna?
A lot.
A lot.
Ooh,
Okay.
Probably around 14 dB or more.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Okay. So lots of stuff coming out of that.
Yeah.
And of course,
but the previous 10 kilowatt transmitter wasn't as efficient as the current newer transmitter, which is only a few years old. Which is a newer Nortel transmitter. So they have a higher efficiency than the older Harris one we had.
Yeah. Now the newer Nortels are, as I said, the big three, I guess, whether it's a Nortel, a Gates, or Gates Harris, or a Roden Schwartz, are all very efficient, very, very good transmitters.
Worth noting, and Stephen has mentioned this, he's gone from an antenna with some number of bays to an antenna with more bays. So it will have more output, the antenna will have more gain, but he's not violating the laws of physics, because all that happens is you are compressing the pattern. So you're sending more stuff outwards rather than upwards where nobody is actually listening, or downwards where nobody wants to listen.
Yeah.
Has going to the 16 bay antenna sort of noticeably increased how far out you get with the same power?
Yeah, interesting enough. It has focused it more. We used to be a bit more north and south. It's mainly pointing west. So coverage is not as good in the areas that we weren't supposed to get into.
Like way out to sea.
Yeah, and out to sea as well. Yeah. It has helped a lot in the fringe areas, some of the fringe areas.
Interesting question has just popped up. What's the average community radio EIRP, and does the ACMA requirement of graphing the tower if you exceed 100 watts limit station power? So let's take the second part of that question first. The requirement of graphing the power. That wasn't one I knew about. Anybody want to comment?
Well, normally you'd to work out, unless you want to go out there and with your FIM or field intensity meter or something like that, you would your first port of call would be to the antenna manufacturer and have a look at the actual antenna pattern of the antenna that you put up there, whether you've got a cross, if you're in a typical cross polarized with a with or without a reflector, whether you're getting an omni pattern, whether you've got a reflector on the back, or if you're at the side of your service area and you might be running a 5 bay Yagi or something like that to focus it a little more over to the side. But first port of call, I'd say there, if you had to prove a pattern, is from your manufacturer's information, RFS, JamPro, anybody like that, when you buy an antenna from them, will give you a very accurate pattern tested and a lovely handbook with everything about your antenna.
What I might do, because this is, I want to make sure I've got this question right, because it'd be very easy to go off and discuss something that isn't right. Let's just see if we can throw to Rob, who asked the question. So Mick, are you able to bring Rob into the discussion?
Yeah, let me.
Right, let's go and see if Rob wants to talk, because he might not.
Yeah, Rob, if you just want to press the raise hand bottom down the bottom of your screen, there we go. I can allow you to speak.
There we go. So Rob, you want to talk to us about what you think the requirement is, and then we'll see if we can talk about whether that's needed or not.
Okay, when we, can you hear me first of all?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Go
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, caller.
Wonderful, thank you. When we first put in our transmitters on a mountaintop 10, 15 years ago, I was told at the time that ACMA required an RFI graphing of the tower if we were to put out more than 100 watts. And it became the limitation that I used from then on, that I put in multiple transmitters around the place, but never exceeded the 100 watts because we couldn't afford to graph the RFI on the tower. Now, it's not our tower I'm talking about. It's a common use tower. So there are other customers on that tower.
Okay. I'm going to guess, like you said, RFI, which I think would be radio frequency interference. So
it's RF levels.
Yes.
For the people who are working on the towers.
Now that's
so that
that's
they don't
slightly
have to
different.
carry the little froggy thing on their pocket.
All right. I suspect the person who can talk to this best is Alastair. So as you put transmitters and antennas onto the side of a tower, what is the requirement then for protection levels so you don't fry other people who are working on the tower? And I think that's where Rob would be going with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the actual levels are offhand at the moment, but certainly there would be a requirement to do an RF radiation hazard report on it. I mean, we had to do similar on the AM stations. You'd have the site RF hazard report.
Normally, I would expect the term there to be EMR, the electromagnetic radiation, and that is actually predictable. So if you know the antenna, you should then be able to predict how much power goes where. There are modeling programs that will do that for you. And of course, there are three sort of zones. There is the danger, you don't want to go there because your bits will drop off. There is the occupational zone, which is the zone where you're allowed to work there because you understand how RF management should be done. And there's the public zone, which is where you could stand there indefinitely and nothing would happen. I don't know how,
I believe that is true. I've had the same thing. Being an RF worker, I have been with that before. But the information that I had at the stage, a long time ago, was that ACMA did not require you to do graphing of the tower or working out what the electromagnetic radiation is on the tower from our transmitter if we are below 100 watts. And we have a fault dipole, so it's isotropic.
That's an interesting one. Thank you very much for raising that, Rob. I suspect that's something we should go and look at and maybe run a discussion in Q&A, but it's also one of those ones where I think we'd want to get some sort of accurate response from somebody who knows rather than go down lines of conjecture. I don't know, again, Al, it strikes me that if you only have 100 watts, you're pretty safe, although standing right next to a live 100 watt continuously illuminated radiator probably isn't the healthiest thing you could do or should do.
Well, no, I wouldn't do it.
Well, there you go. Spoken like an expert. All right. Thanks very much for that, Rob. Mike Tobin was asking if there was any down tilt, but I'm not sure who he was asking that of. That might have been of Hope, and I'd be pretty sure that there'd be no down tilt on Hope's antenna. It's like What are they? Is RFS 828s or something?
Yeah.
Stacked
And
vertically, so it'd be pretty much a donut.
75 meters up.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a question here in the comments in the chat box, John, from Harry M. The question is: this may go nowhere, but have spare parts for Elan Kestrel or others, especially faders, become more available, if at all, or is there a workaround of sorts?
Just hang on. Let me just have a look at that. Where especially faders. Oh, I see. I thought he was saying he had spare parts. Have they become more available, or are they becoming less available? Okay, well, we actually have a question about an Eagle, and I'll throw to Anna in Perth in a second on this. I would think that's a complete move from transmitters. So we'll close that off and we'll move. My feeling is that spare parts are becoming harder to get. They're not becoming easier to get, but there are some spare parts which fortunately look like being available for quite a long time. So faders, especially if they're Penny and Giles faders and they're common faders like 10K log pots, likely to be available for a very long time.
Yeah, I think the Kestrels use Penny and Giles 8000 series probably. The plastic bodied ones. The local Penny and Giles agent for them that you can still buy through is Control Devices Audio in Alexandria. They've been Penny and Giles agent who actually supply to, or used to supply to Elan. So you can get any Penny and Giles fader that's still available. Penny and Giles have scaled down a lot of their manufacture of faders as things have changed in the world, but you can certainly still get the 8000 series there. And like the 3000 series are still using Wheatstone desks and the like.
Of course, these days, slide faders are slide faders, and there are really only two types of faders. They've either got a resistive element, even if it's controlling a digital circuit, or they have some sort of digital sender and they're measuring going up and down. But I would imagine the resistive element is going to be with us for quite a while.
Yeah, the good ones, the conductive plastic ones that Penny and Giles use, and there are still some other manufacturers. Alps still make some very good faders as well.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of other manufacturers there that will still make faders. I think your older ones like your who used to make it Audio Fad, the old CSC ones all used a different English brand called Audio Fad, which had an unusual spacing, which meant you couldn't retrofit Penny and Giles into a CSC one without butchering it. But there's still anything that has had a standard 104 millimeter spacing fader in it, you could get something else in there. And most of us will have used in a typical audio console. If it's an analog audio console, it'll be a 10K audio tape.
Right. Cameron, I think you've got CSC ones at Triple R at the moment, or have you got something else? What are you?
He says, looking across the room at the carcasses. I couldn't declare whether they're ones or not. They're certainly Pulkirk CSC consoles.
Yeah, I think they would be. And if I remember rightly, those didn't actually send the audio through the fader. They used the fader to control
the fader is a BCA in those. Or in our desks, they're BCAs. I don't know whether that was a universal design element.
For that series of console, I believe it was.
It was pretty innovative in 86 or 87 when they first started doing it.
Yeah. And to sort of going back to Harry's question, probably the biggest difficulty that anybody faces for maintenance is where a manufacturer did something that was highly innovative at the time, using parts that subsequently went away. So people who were using DBX volume controlled amplifier chips, for instance, and now some of those are just completely unavailable.
No, yeah, DBX 2150 VCAs, they were all the RMEs were full of, RME 400s were full of them. Try buying them now.
A wonderful idea at the time. Let's see if Anna, we can take down Rob now, Mick, and let's see if Anna in Perth is available. Anna, just pop your hand up because that'll make it easy for Mick to find you. And if we don't see the hand go up, then we know you're not there. She's got the hand. So Anna, you raised a question before the session about your console, and I'm guessing that it's one of the mic channels, and I'm guessing that the fader does something stupid as people push it up and down.
It's the announcer mic that they've done it to, the master one, I guess. We've got 3 other guest mics on that console as well. It's the Elan Eagle. Right. And we've got a duplicate studio with only 2 guest mics and the announcer as well. So on the announcer, instead of just going up and down, as you see there, the one that I've put a red rectangle against, when they move that, it not only goes up and down as it should with like all the others, it goes to the left as well.
Okay, which sounds like there's some sort of break in the fader.
Yep.
Now, okay, so let's throw that out to the panel. Cameron, what would you do in that case? I'm sure you've spent a bit of time replacing faders in your day.
Well, yeah, but the assumption there is that the fader's in the fader. Mm-hmm. Without a phalanx of spares, one thing you could do is to move the channel strip, and I'm not familiar with that desk, but looking at it, it seems to me the channel strips are discrete. So
and they are.
That would mean that you could pull the channel strip out and put it in the adjacent one, and see if the behaviour stays exactly the same, or whether the faulty behaviour moves with the channel strip. So in doing that, you've eliminated a problem from the desk mainframe, or you've determined whether the problem lies in the channel strip or the desk mainframe. Since the fader's an electromechanical device, then we could expect that it's, and that's your announcer mic channel by the looks of it.
Yes.
So it's probably the fader on that desk that's been actuated the most number of times.
Yep.
And so swapping faders, depending on the design of the fader, can be as simple as unplugging a multi-pin connector and undoing 2 screws. But where I'm going with that thought is move the fader to see if the fader assembly is in fact the problem, or whether there's an electronics problem on the board. Does that channel strip have a pan pot? I can't kind of see on my screen.
No, it not from the photo, but when I looked at the block diagram before, I believe it does not.
And so it's hard coded to drop each channel, quote unquote, onto the left and right buses of the desk. Sorry, that was a question. I made it sound like a statement.
I'm new to this position. I'm the accidental techie, by the way. So I really haven't had much of a handover, and so I really don't know. I don't know.
So welcome to the great learning experience. Let me clarify something that you wrote in the email, Anna. So as somebody pushes up the fader, it might be that the gain goes up and down, or it might be that they push it to one side and it suddenly drops one or other of the 2 channels. Did I read the question correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. So what happens is, as they're moving it, we lose. I can't remember whether it's the left channel or the right channel, but we lose it completely. So there's actually no. There you go. Yeah, so it's we completely lose the level of the left or right channel. Now, just Betty, one of the announcers, has just said it was the left. So we actually lose the left channel coming through. Now, our problem also there is that we haven't had any maintenance on our systems since I've been in this position for just under 2 years now, and we actually do have an imbalance of levels anyway, going out from the desk somewhere along the line to the server room, I guess. So our left is actually more pronounced than our right. So with this situation here where we've got no left at all coming through, it's basically silence.
And I see that those desks have got selectors for the program and audition bus. So another simple thing you could do without getting out tools is to see if when you drop that channel onto the audition bus, you also the behaviour stays the same. Those buttons, the bus assign buttons,
Yep.
Can fail in on of themselves. And so it might be that we're looking in the wrong place, and jiggling the buttons up and down. I know that sounds like pretty crude form of percussive maintenance, but you'd be astonished at how often that can actually turn something into working. Now that tells you perhaps not so much that you fixed it, but what the component is that needs further attention.
So what was that buttons that I needed to test?
So just
'Cause I can
above the
ask
fader,
announcer.
there are two bus assign buttons. One's labelled AUD, which is an abbreviation for audition. The other is labelled, I think, PGM. The photo's gone off my screen, but
Yep.
PGM is the abbreviation for program. And so in normal operation, you'd keep that channel selected to your program bus.
Yep.
And so those two switches are generically called bus selector switches.
Mhm.
And so pounding gently up and like actuating the switch multiple times to see if that changes the behavior of the left-right channel shift when you move the fader.
Okay.
So on the picture here, Anna, there is there's a program button and there's an audition button.
Yes.
And you will also have the ability over here on monitoring to listen to program and audition.
That's correct.
So what Cameron's suggesting is you listen on program, push the fader up and down, then you go and you monitor on audition and push the button up and down, push the fader up and down and see if anything changes. If it's the same on both program and audition, it's pretty much going to be the problem with the fader. But it could be that something else in the module is actually being moved.
Okay.
I would be suggesting, though, in this case, the absolute first thing you do would be to say, how about we only have 3 fully operational microphones and in the studio, and we'll move the current announcer's mic over to the guest 3 position on the basis that that's the one that gets used the least.
So the other option, if you think of it that way, as I said, we've got the second studio, which has got 2 guest mics and the announcer mic as well. Now, one of those guest mics isn't actually being used at the moment, so I guess we could pull it out of that one and swap those 2.
Swap the channel strips firstly.
Yep.
Okay. Yep.
Make sure that you power down the desk before you pull a channel strip out.
Good. I was going to ask that.
Really? Those
Some
those
are hot
ones,
swappable, some aren't.
yeah, some aren't. Yes.
Don't find out the hard way.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
And circling
Shower
back
smart.
to your observation about the ordinary channel imbalance, when that studio is off air, do you have the capacity in the station to listen to what that studio is doing, perhaps from your control room?
I've got good question.
Okay, well, that's something you can do as homework, but if you can listen to the output of that studio, try switching the left and right program bus outputs, the mechanical connectors that interface the program bus, and see if the imbalance shifts, because the assertion you made was that the imbalance is in the desk, but actually all you know is that the imbalance is somewhere in your signal path from the source in the studio through to your transmitter. And you were saying that switching studios, then the channel is not imbalanced when Studio 2's on air, but it's imbalanced when Studio 1's on air. So all you've really said is that there's an imbalance somewhere from the source material in Studio 1 through to your delegation switcher.
Okay.
Okay, so lots of discussion there and lots of homework there, and probably, of course, the first thing to do is to consult your full block diagram that you have developed as part of your station documentation that says exactly what gear you do have, what happens after your studio switching, what monitoring and metering you have that allows you to test and set stuff up before it goes to air.
I'm still working on that one.
Yeah,
I'm getting there.
And
slowly,
that will be
very slowly.
Might have a chat with you in the next day or so, Anna, offline. So we'll come back. I've got some suggestions there that might be helpful offline. All right, good. Thank you very much. Really interesting question, and of course a whole lot of aspects covered there, including problem determination. It's really good to see how the wheels turn with techs when there's a problem that needs to be solved. Stephen, you're running a station now that is like fully digital. I think it's your full Axia.
Yeah.
Have you had any problems with digital faders since that gear went in, or is it like too early for you to have the sort of problems that faders develop after too much use?
No, our first two studios were done in 2007.
So that's a while.
Yeah, I've been in service for what's that? 15 years.
15 years.
Yeah. So fader wise, all the faders have worked fine. I really can't remember having to replace. You have a spares kit, as you should when you buy anything. It's best to have a spares kit when it's new, rather than trying to source something 15 years later. So I haven't had to. I've replaced a monitor knob, which is, again, it's a rotary encoder. So it's no audio going through it. So I've had to replace one of those. It'd be no sound and a lot of sound and nothing in between was how it worked.
Never very good. Al, your experience, I guess you haven't been doing much with digital desks, certainly. The analog desks recently, the analog desks that used to look after at for instance 2UE. Much problem with faders? What did you do to stop them from failing?
Well, the faders when we did still have analog at 2UE were they were CSC ones, so they were we would buy as many audio faders as we could and replace them, clean them. The later consoles, when we put a Klotz system through. Klotz used to use I think it was an Alps fader in theirs, and we didn't really have much problem there, apart from announcers regularly giving them a drink, which is there's a lot of coffee and Coke went through them.
Liquid Coke.
Liquid. Yes. But they would generally come good. There was more than one occasion when we had to completely strip a console out and wash them in distilled water and then let them dry for a while. Great place for drying off components like that is to put them, if you've got a large UPS for the station, then you can go and put them on the top of that where all the hot air blows out.
The other place, of course, is a nice warm transmitter room if you happen to have one.
Yep. Oh, yes, on top of it, anything which is blowing a lot of warm air up.
Well, that would be your announcers.
Yeah, I was going to say. Your key talent room.
There is an article on the Technorama website about care and maintenance of faders, and one of the courses that we've been teaching with the CMTO, the Station Blitz, generally speaking, involves taking consoles such as the Eagle or a Kestrel or something very similar to that, and stripping it right down to the faders, and then stripping the faders down and cleaning them. And there is an article on the Technorama website that talks about care and feeding of faders. So go and check that out. I would like to do a quick word from our sponsors right now, because I think it's a good time to do this. So let me see if I can get this back on my screen. Combination of PowerPoint and Zoom willing. And I did say there was going to be a big announcement, and here it is. So you guys are going to be the first to hear this. This is in the planning stage at the moment, but we're committed to making this happen. This is the plan. And the plan is, let's see, the plan is to press the right button to get it to advance. It's just so... Okay, we will go back to there, press that, do this. Okay, just talk amongst yourselves while I sort this. This is another thing that worked just fine at rehearsal, and
wow.
And now it's there. You go. Yeah. So we've been talking about Technorama. A number of people have said, well, when are you running the next one? And we sort of went into hiatus last year. The year before, we ran the virtualized TR20. Our plan for this year is to run a warm body event, but we thought we'd do it with a difference. So where in the past we've picked a central location, had everybody come to us, this year we're going to come to you. So we're planning to run Technorama 22 as a roadshow in 3 locations, and I'll give you some dates and places in a second. The format will be a single day, so nobody has to come in and spend any time in a hotel. We're trying to keep the cost for delegates down, and if it's in one of the 3 places where we're planning to run, then it will just be local travel for the day. And no hotel, and consequently no expenses. The great thing about that is it's also going to allow us to reduce some of the costs that we have in running the event, so that the fee for delegates will also be commensurately reduced. Expect us to be running a full day program on a Saturday. So we'll start at about 9ish, we'll finish at about 5:30. In the program, there will be 3 solid technical sessions. It'll be the same technical sessions in each location. There will be updates from our partners. So our partners are the CBAA, the CBF, and the CMTO, the peak body for the sector, the people who everybody hopes is going to give them just wonderful amounts of money, and the CMTO, who are, of course, supporting us in this broadcast, and the CMTO is the outlet for training across the sector. So we will be giving you both technology and sector and environmental updates, really important. We're going to allow plenty of time for people to network, so the breaks will be long enough so you can go and find your colleagues, your friends, people you haven't talked to for so long. And in the evening, we will have a function somewhere. It'll be a low price, low cost, not necessarily low quality event somewhere, but we'll be doing that at own expense. So you'll be able to choose how much you want to spend. Again, a way of cutting down the delegate fees. There is a strawman program that we've got, so we have a pretty good idea of how it's going to work. Too late if you didn't take a photo of that, although you'll probably go to the replay and grab it from there. So the program that we're looking at is sort of pretty much locked in place, and now we're backfilling it with exactly what topics. And we're looking at events like this and discussion on Q&A to decide what do we think are the most important topics. How to find people, how to train people, and how to plan your next facility seem to be right up the top there, but we'll be announcing those topics in a little while. Cost to attend, we're working on bringing it for under $80. So, you know, it should be hopefully within either station or personal household affordability mark. It might even be cheaper than that. There will be a discount for people who are members of Technorama, and we have a small amount of money available to both provide a bursary for people who are underrepresented in the sector, but also to support a bit of travel from locations that aren't the three places that I'm about to reveal. And then in the future, we will go back most likely to having a single event bringing everybody in. So where are we planning to do it? You can write down the dates. These are the targets. Hold them. They are bound to clash with something. It is not possible to run an event at this time of the year without clashing with something, but these are the dates we're expecting. So the 17th of September, it's Saturday, will be in Sydney. 2 weeks later, 1st of October, we'll run in Brisbane. That is a long weekend in some locations. And we will then run in Melbourne on the 8th of October, and I believe the AFL Grand Final is on the 1st. So we should be clear of absolutely everything. So there you go. Hold the dates. That'll be Technorama 22, and it is a roadshow. So lots of fun. Okay, back to the questions on the board. And let's see, I'm hoping that she's available. Meredith, or actually it's Bernie and Andrew masquerading as Meredith. So somebody pop your hand up. And this is a station in Esperance, which is in Western Australia, quite a way this side of Albany, which is quite a way this side of Perth. And when I say this side, I'm over on the east. What would I know? And the question is, how do we determine what equipment we need to run a small station? What should we be aiming for in the future? And we're running at the moment, but not sure if we have the right equipment, need assistance to review. I cannot think of a more open possible question to ask. So if you want to whack your hand up, okay, we have somebody there who's online. Don't all
well,
talk
we're
at
both
once.
here, but Andrew.
Thanks. Hi, Andrew. Welcome. Welcome to Stump the
Good,
Chumps.
good to be here.
So it's a very broad question. So are you talking about the studio or the transmitter or the studio transmitter link or OB or all of the above?
In a way, all of the above. I guess I'd posted another question just following on from that one. Our transmitter sits on a coastal headland, so we could start with that one. Is there an advantage, because there's not much point broadcasting to all the past shipping because it's all foreign and probably doesn't speak our language? Yeah, so would a directional transmitter be advantageous to us, for example, as a first question?
A directional antenna. Look, I'm going to throw to, well, there's certainly a directional antenna, and even just mounting your antenna on the side of a pole appropriately, the side of the mast, can give you partially directional pattern. What sort of antenna are you using at the moment? Is it still the collinear that you had some time back?
Probably. I'm not very tech. I know that we did have it repaired a while back and boosted our output. Yeah. But we also share the tower with another commercial station, and they claimed we were messing with their signal, so we had to actually turn our signal down a little bit. Yeah. So just looking at that sort of stuff.
Al, you want to lead off with this?
Yeah, certainly. Providing you would be allowed to, you'd have to check with what your license actually states that you're supposed to be. Now, there should be on your apparatus license from ACMA a pattern. So you'd need to make sure that you can put an antenna up with a different pattern. You may already be not conforming to that pattern depending on what's gone up there, but they have probably just issued an omnidirectional. So you may need to apply to change that to a different pattern if you wanted to do that as you're on a headland. Certainly an RFS or JamPro antenna or something like that with a reflector on the back of it would be able to direct a bit more of that power inland if you were permitted to do that. And that would give you a better performance and put the power out there, because as you say, there's not a lot of point in having half of your radiated power going to the out to the sea.
Antennas are really a bit like microphones. So the same way you think of a microphone pattern that you would achieve by doing something either via a reflector or by doing phasing of the back, you can quite easily get an antenna that looks like a cardioid. So it's got stuff out to the front, but quite a bit off to the sides. Yeah.
Yep. And you do that fairly easily. The panel antennas Stephen was talking about before, the A28s up on the site at Artarmon, they'll be a panel antenna with a reflector on the back of it, because there's not a lot of point when you've got 4 antennas on 4 faces having power going out the back.
Yeah, and also if you're mounted on the side of a tower, the actual tower acts as if it's a reflector as well. Yeah.
Yep.
Certainly even for a standard dipole or a couple of dipoles fed together, depending on how far they are spaced from the vertical pole to which they're attached, you can get a bit of a directional pattern. You sort of shift it into a minor figure 8. It's not a lot, but it might give you a bit of a null you need if that's what your license area plan requires.
Yeah. So the first thing, I guess, is to check what our license allows us.
And the pattern will be described in the license area plan.
Yeah.
License area plans are incredible, and the patterns are incredibly hard to find. You can find all of the information about your transmitter pretty easily. That's available from the ACMA online, and you can just keep drilling through searches until you find the info. But I've actually found it quite difficult to find exactly where the pattern is located on their website. And if anybody knows, I would love to put that information on the Technorama website.
It's generally part of, you have to drill down into the licensing, and then eventually you get to the PDF of your license, and then generally at the bottom of that, it'll say you've got so many kilowatts or watts in one direction, and goes around like that on the 360 degrees.
But it is quite possibly in a locked filing cabinet in a basin with a sign that says "Beware of the leopard." So not easy to find. For some reason, there's no reason why you shouldn't find that info. All right, let's go from the antenna then, and the age-old problem that you've had of co-tenants not being terribly happy with you actually broadcasting as loud as they do. I mean, who knew that a commercial operator might feel that the local community station was a bit too receivable? So what happens next, Andrew?
Well, we're still not 100% sure that the antenna is fully functional. We think it got hit by lightning a few years back. That was why it got replaced. But we're still not 100% confident it's running it at its peak efficiency, regardless of how much power we're actually putting through it.
All right, let's deal with that question. What's a good way to find out?
Well, certainly see what the depending on the transmitter, what your VSWR is, because if you've got a perfect antenna which is radiating well, you'll have a low amount of reflected power. If you're getting a high amount of reflected power, let's assume you're putting 100 or 200 watts in. If you're getting more than a few watts back, then your antenna is not operating efficiently.
Okay, so you'd be looking for a switch on your power amplifier metering, assuming there is some, that says forward and rev, and forward will be whatever your forward power is, and rev will be what is being reflected back, and that should be just off the stop or on the stop, not moving at all.
It should be down
ideally.
fairly low, ideally. If you've got a good match to an antenna through your cavity filter or whatever, you should be getting typically on a large, say a 10 or 20 kilowatt transmitter, I'll be aiming for us to have a match where we might have on 20 kilowatts, we might have up to 20 watts reflected. I really wouldn't like much more than that. And so about 0.1% reflected. Ideally should be 0 if you've got a perfect match and you're getting maximum power transfer.
Andrew, did that make some sense?
Yes, I've not yet been up to our transmitting hut, so I can to check the readings and stuff. I've heard people talk about them. We are, as far as I'm aware, our maximum capacity at the moment is 1,000 watts. So when you're talking 20,000, that's way above us. So what we be expecting barely a flicker on the reverse meter.
If it's a good match, you would expect just a couple of watts to be reflected back. As the antenna fails, as any of the connections get corroded, full of water, anything else, some of the power won't go into the antenna, or if the antenna itself is in fact falling into disrepair, not all of the power will be correctly radiated by the antenna, and some of it will be reflected back. And your power amp metering is usually the first point of observation that something is wrong. Okay.
So, one of our big dramas is actually the location of the tower. It's not easily accessible. The tech that did the job on the last work we had on it, he climbed it, but after he did it once, he said he was never going to do it again. So to get it again, we would have to get a cherry picker up there, which was going to cost a fair slice of money because it's fairly high.
Unfortunately, that's a fact of life. It's one of the things that comes with the very strong workplace health and safety regime that we now have in Australia, plus the fact that people really don't like climbing towers very much, but checking it, checking the power amp metering, you should be able to do that from the ground. Head up there and have a look. Okay, coming back from there, what questions would you have about Studio?
Well, I guess our operating program we run on Dazzler. We haven't been having a few hiccups. We've bought and paid for the Dazzler. What's the new one? But we haven't installed it, and because we're a bit toey about change over to a new system. Do you think the name of the new Dazzler, Bernie?
Let's just tackle that. So you've got a product, you've got the next release ready, and now you're not terribly comfortable about what it takes to put that into service, and that's a really good risk management question to be asking. Let's throw that open to the panel. What advice do you have about how to introduce a new release of a new system or a new system entirely for something as critical as station automation? Cameron?
Yeah, that's a little unfair, John, because the way I would approach it compared to these guys in Esperance, a bottomless bucket of money, is to install it in my lab and make sure that it performs to spec, customize it so that to the extent possible, the new version behaves in the studio to the operators the same as the old version, deploy it in the wee small hours of the morning by using an image so I can roll the studio computers back. The very least, though, you could do is to get any old PC that you can have donated and run the software up on a similar operating system. So if you're using Windows 10 in the studio, use Windows 10 on the PC, and have people who are familiar with operating it give you some feedback about whether the out-of-the-box configuration is the configuration you have in your studio. I think for me, that would be where I would expect the largest surprise, that previous generations have done some customization on how the software behaves, and your presenters and operators have become somewhat rusted on. And so just because it has the same name on the tin doesn't mean that when you install it fresh, it's going to look and feel the same as the one you're using in the studio.
Sure, but Andrew's raised an interesting point, and I think you've touched on something that's very sensible, which is he's reticent to throw something without testing. Your suggestion of create an image, run that on an arbitrary piece of hardware, and make sure that you can roll back the existing system, presumably with an image restore if things don't work.
That's precisely what I'm proposing. Like every step of the way, when you've got a scarce number of resources and people are depending on them, almost make sure you've got a backup plan. And for software that runs in studios on PCs, the backup plan is typically to make an image. I mean, depending on the tech savvy of people in the station, the image can actually be a different hard drive, and you can swap the physical hard drives around. But most of us would actually use imaging software like Ghost to throw what's the True Image one? A Cronus True Image.
Yep.
To throw the image onto a portable hard drive or SSD. And that allows you to roll backwards and forwards. So maybe you don't get the configuration completely right in the lab and you run it out to some trusted broadcasters. And trusted here are broadcasters who won't get rattled if things are not quite right. You get their feedback, and then you go back to the lab and tweak some more and then do the image swap over. It's going to cost you quite a bit of an investment in time, but it means that when you finally commit to it, your presenters are not going to be ambushed by something that behaves in ways that they don't expect.
Yeah, a very important point. Stephen, what experience have you had as you've rolled out new versions of software? Now you're using Zeta, so is it because of the architecture of the system? Is that as difficult to manage as, say, multiple copies of Jazzler, or is it?
Yeah, yes, it's not an easy thing to roll back. I mean, yes, we have copies and images of our setup, but usually the update requires a database update as well, which is not easy to roll back once you have done it. Most of the time, the features are the same. It's just some little tweaks here and there. So as far as presenters go, looking at it, it's operates the same. And you don't, and because you're to upgrade to most of the time, you're having to make a database change. It's hard to do an offline backup with say one studio do an update, because the whole system's got to update. But we sometimes will run a standalone system and do a test that way. The other yeah. so it can be a bit tricky and a lot more involved. But we spend a lot of time going through the release notes that they would give, as in, in this version has got an update to this, or a bug fix for this and that sort of thing, and look through all the different changes. Of course, sometimes once you have done it, you're the person that finds a bug that no one else has found. And so, yeah, but the trick in what we do, we never update as soon as an update has been released. We usually wait maybe 6 months so that everybody else has found the other bugs.
Wise words. So Al, you're working at a very large, high-rating metropolitan commercial radio station. How did you approach updating software? I mean, did you?
We did put some things in there, but usually after they were well tested. A lot of things like that when we first introduced phone box for taking the on-air calls. We were running a 24-line system there for on-air in the early days. There were quite a lot of extra features that would come through. If necessary, we would build a separate server. Again, we had the option to do that, but build a separate server and separate workstations to test it thoroughly before we inflicted it on the presenters, as some of them could be a little bit touchy about us trying things on air directly.
The concept of actually create a sandbox and test with that over and over has come up 3 times. But of course, my 3 colleagues are all working in the environment where they had fairly large environments, and I'm not sure Cameron's bucket is bottomless, but sort of take his point. What advice would you give for somebody who is, well, say in Esperance, where maybe PCs aren't growing on trees and you don't have the ability to do a full lab install of a parallel system?
I think I touched on some of the elements, John. So, and I don't know much, anything at all about the particular station, but if you had 2 studios, then committing for the next couple of days to broadcasting from a single studio and using the imaging approach to insulate yourself from failure, deploy the new software in the studio that's not on air, and get operators who are familiar with driving the software to come in and spend an hour, half an hour pretending to do a program from the other studio. If you only get one studio, you've got a lot of challenges, but I still think deploying live is so risky that you need a backup plan. And so maybe there's a fundraising needed to get someone to donate some PC hardware so that you've got something. So like I refer to that, any basic sand pit where you can deploy software and play around with its configuration is what I would call a lab. So it doesn't have to be an entirely elaborate B site, which is a duplicate of of your production system, but having a little bit of redundancy there. And at all times, if you're going to go live with something, at the point where you decide to go live, make sure you can scurry back. And I don't diminish Stephen's observations, but my suspicion is that Jazzler is not using a large central database. And so each studio's instance of the software can largely operate autonomously. So that works in your favor. You don't have the kind of challenges that those of us with centralized systems where all the studios talk back to the mothership have to take a slightly different approach.
Sure. Andrew, how many studios do you have?
One live studio, and when we're doing outside broadcasts, we remote into that, and we still work through that through the one live studio.
So you don't have a second or a backup studio?
We've got a recording studio, but it's not fully plugged in for doing. Okay. Yeah, it's the recording studio.
I think that gives the answer that the panel would want for further comments. There is a question I would ask. Do you regularly take an image backup? And there's some great comments that have been put into the chat about backup software. I know I personally use a thing called O&O, which allows me to take images or incremental backups, and every so often I do a complete restore to make sure that an incremental backup will work when it's restored. You certainly, as Cameron says, having an image-based approach where if something goes wrong, you just completely blast back to the last known good state of the machine will keep you out of trouble. Al, were you going to jump in there, or was that just a hmm?
There was a hmm.
It was a hmm.
I'd add, John, I'd add an observation that, again, circumstances allow me to have computers that are dedicated to a single function. Yeah. And I don't back them up. I just replace their hard drives and restore an image because there is nothing of value on the computer. And you might say, well, what about broadcast to interview files? Well, they get stored on a central file server that is backed up. But I'm talking about the computers in my studios, we regard them as appliances. And when when the smoke gets out, we take it out, we put the cold spare that we've got sitting in the tech room in the studio. The studio is operational again. We then triage the malfunctioning PC. Maybe the SSD's failed. That's currently the most likely thing happens. So new SSD, restore image, that goes on the shelf in the tech room as the cold spare.
All right, so there's a really good tip. Don't worry about backing up. Just make sure you've got an image that you can restore back that gives you a base level device. But as Cameron says, that works for him because all of the changing files live on network attached storage or some other form of maintained environment, a different machine. Great tip there.
Yeah, I remember years ago, each studio would have what we'd call internet computer, where everybody would browse, do weather, traffic, and look up information. And we used to think of it a bit like a public toilet, after everybody had been doing stuff with it. And we had a practice years ago that every once a month, the machine would just get wiped and an image restored. So it would start from scratch as a clean install.
Yep. Similarly, our old standard at 2UE and throughout Fairfax Radio used to be to keep the playout machines as an appliance, or if it was a very specific machine, keep the browsing and everything else off them and lock them down. So to stop things going wrong with them as often, because quite often presenters using something on the playout machine, surfing the net, reading text messages, looking up their emails as well, all on the one machine, will cause more problems in the long run.
Yeah. Playout machines have no access to the internet or, as you say, browsers or anything.
It's an appliance.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about using screen sharing software on if you've only got one machine, one screen, you've got your playout system there, but using screen sharing software so you can get from that machine to another machine that does have the internet access?
No.
You don't have any thoughts, or you wouldn't recommend doing
I wouldn't recommend it.
Ah.
To much as we say, the cost of buying another computer, a basic screen these days is available from Officeworks for $100 or $150 for a 24-inch screen. A basic computer, which will give you internet browsing, etc., is only a few $100s. It's really worth investing in that for a machine for the general browsing in there, and keep away from the playout system. Playout system and the production system should be kept safe.
Good advice, and probably this is a great topic to pop up on Q&A where it can be thrashed out. I would certainly infer from the discussion that my colleague Mr. Reynolds has not looked at grant applications and seen some of the minuscule budgets under which some stations operate. So I certainly feel for people who say, yeah, but we can't afford another PC. Different discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Some things that have come up also, which I think might be for discussion on Q&A. There was a question from Tony at Binjang about rating brands for robustness and reliability in transmitters. I would actually encourage that discussion on Q&A. One of the house rules there is you can talk about speeds and feeds and experiences. The only reason the admins will come and shut you down is if you're actually irrationally hacking into a supplier for reasons that aren't actually correct. But certainly, if you want to talk about robustness and reliability and ask the question, get some feedback, Q&A is a good place to ask those questions. It's quarter to 8, so we've been going for an hour and a quarter. I think an interesting question to wrap up with, and then we'll park it for the night, is a question about phasing problems running equipment from one studio to another on separate power circuits. So if I understand, and by the way, thank you very much, Esperance, and we'll be getting back to you very shortly. So let's see. Tony, who asked that question there, do you want to just quickly whack your hand up, and I'll just check that I'm getting what you actually meant by the question. While we're waiting for him, I believe the question is about, okay, he's there. Go ahead, Tony, you're on the line. Or not. Now we can hear you. Now we can't hear you. You're muted. Unmute. Try now.
You got me?
Yep, got you.
All right. Had this issue where we took a feed from our computer into our panel in another studio.
An audio feed?
An audio feed.
Yes.
And consequently, we had problems with the panel afterwards. So we suspected that it could have been caused by a phasing issue because one room separated from the other might have been on a different circuit.
Can you just say you had problems? What do you mean? It blew up, it turned into flame, you had hum, it played the wrong track from the automation system?
Yes, just about all of that.
Oh, okay. No, seriously, did you have some damage?
Yes.
You had smoke come out?
No.
Okay.
But look, I haven't sort of explored it too much. I'm just going to. It was an ELAN, by the way, which I want to preserve because of the user friendliness. But I haven't sort of sent it away for fixing because we've got a backup, and I just slotted that straight in.
Okay. I'm going to suggest that if you're interconnecting audio paths in studios, the first thing you'd want to make sure is that you're doing it via balanced lines. And if you're not doing it via balanced lines, you would want to make sure that the earths are very, very carefully managed between areas. And it strikes me then, if you do have multiple phases, that you might not be doing yourself a favor. But ideally, all of your studios have been taken back to a technical Earth, and you can rely on Earth potential being the same. But I might throw this one to Mr. Al, say your experience there with Earths, some advice.
Yes, certainly, as you said, you should have everything back to a technical Earth and in a star fashion, so that you maintain the. It sounds to me like you've got, if you're just using the general Earth through the PowerPoint, you may have a power issue within the studios, even if you're on separate circuits or whatever, because all the Earths should be tied back, and in fact, all of the neutrals will be tied back to the same neutral link anyway. So the phasing shouldn't affect. You're going through, if it's an ELAN desk, or a little ELAN Hawk or something like that, then you're going to be going through a toroidal transformer, a standard linear regulated power supply. But it sounds like there's something not right in the earthing overall. So you've got different earth potential between the studios.
Certainly one of the challenges for designing a console, for instance, is making sure that your earths are correctly managed. So standard electrical wiring in this country would, as Al says, take the earths from every power point back to a common point on the switchboard. They would all be bus barred together, and they would also be common with all the neutrals, and then that would also be tied down to an earth stake that would be a good, safe earth point for the building. But that's not the same actually as having a good technical earth for your facility, because you have no control or knowledge of the paths that the individual earths take before they get back to the switchboard, and they could be jumpered rather than, as Al said, all going back from in star fashion to a common point.
Right.
Right. Another topic where maybe you could ask the question on Q&A.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. We're not sure what caused the problem, but we suspected that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Look, I'm going to suggest that's all we've got time for this Stump the Chumps. We still have a couple of questions there. I'd like to thank my mate Zbang. I don't even know if, yes, he's still there, for his comment way back earlier in the chat about conductive paint on faders, and that's a question I'm going to call him up and ask him about that. It's interesting. Faders generally will, unless they're really worn out, and it sounds like Anna's fader might have suffered some mechanical damage, but frequently faders can be resurrected fairly easily just by cleaning them appropriately. So go and check the article. It's on the Technorama website. Feel free to ask about that on Q&A as well. Let's get some discussion going. One of the things that we would like to do in the future is get some more contact with the ACMA so we can get some of these regulatory questions answered easily. I will say that we've tried, and that hasn't been terribly easy of late. The ACMA is under incredible pressure, and they certainly don't have the number of engineers available to discuss things that they used to have, but we will continue to try and get the ACMA to be involved with Technorama and our events, and indeed with the forums. I would like to thank my colleagues on the panel for their input and their advice, and these are all people who, well, in general, are also available via Q&A, or if they're not, because not everybody likes Facebook, we can certainly pass questions on and get feedback back, so don't feel afraid to ask. The Facebook page is what we have at the moment. That might change sometime in the future, and again, that's a discussion that we should be having on Q&A. So look, I'd really like to thank the Chumps for stumping up. Cameron Paine, thank you very much. I hope you're not in so much agony as you were earlier when we were trying to get you connected via Zoom. Does show the difficulty sometimes of even dealing with an appliance. Stephen Wilkinson from Hope FM, and Alastair Reynolds from Ray Air, with a great collection of equipment behind him. That's just behind that microphone that he hasn't mentioned. There's a large stack of really wonderful Revox equipment, but just if you're wondering, the gold Neumann TLM that is sitting there, that might just be the gold Neumann TLM.
Yeah, yes, that is. It's in for a service and a clean and a restring.
Because even microphones need to be serviced occasionally. And Michaela Ford at the CMTO, thank you very, very much for being there in the background and managing the platform for us. I'm John Maizels, President of Technorama. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We will catch you on the next Stump the Chumps.